Night descended on Seoul with an almost suffocating intensity, and the wind, sweeping across Mapo Bridge, seemed to carry with it the murmurs of ancient sins. The sky, thick with clouds, was lit up at short intervals by lightning streaking the horizon, reflecting a tremulous, almost spectral glow on the choppy waters of the Han River. In the center of the bridge, under the weight of the rain that insisted on falling like divine punishment, Seo Hae-Won remained motionless, her face pale, her eyes lost between despair and disbelief. The drops ran down her skin, mingling with silent tears, making it impossible to distinguish between rain and pain. Before her, Han Jae-Hyun, the man who had once promised to love her above all else, stood firm, with the icy gaze of someone who had forgotten his own humanity. The CEO, wrapped in a sodden dark suit, watched Hae-Won as if contemplating something that needed to be eliminated, not remembered. His words came out slow and cruel, each syllable laden with contempt. "There is nothing more disgusting than a woman who feigns purity." His voice echoed amidst the thunder, stinging more than any blow. Hae-Won took a step back, trembling, her heart pounding wildly between fear and resignation. The wind blew hard, as if trying to stop her, but she only whispered something which the roar of the storm carried away. An instant later, her body launched into the void, the sound of her fall drowned out by the roar of the rain. Jae-Hyun remained, motionless, allowing a brief, bitter smile to appear on his face. He believed he had closed a chapter, but what he didn't know is that very night, destiny was beginning to write his. And when love is pushed into the abyss, will it be possible to escape the cold hands of guilt that always comes back to claim it? If this scene has already caught your attention, subscribe now and leave a like, because what comes next will surprise you every second. Just days before the tragedy, Seoul still glowed with its usual restless charm. Neon signs pulsing from skyscrapers, luxury cars cutting through the avenues like arrows, and hurried men wearing haste and power like armor. Among them, Han Jae-Hyun easily stood out. Young and imposing, CEO of the Hansol Group empire, he was admired for the firmness with which he conducted business and feared for the coldness in his gaze. Surrounded by obedient advisors, he spoke sparingly and made weighty decisions. To the world, he was a model of success. Inside, he had become a walled-off man, unable to access his feelings. His heart had hardened as hard as the glass, separating him from the city outside. Far away in a modest neighborhood in Mapo, Seo Hae-Won folded napkins to the sound of a kettle. The warm light from the kitchen illuminated the simplicity of the scene, the steam from the soup in the air, the makeshift bouquet of flowers on the table, and her cell phone waiting for a message that never came. She loved silently, with small gestures, with weights no one saw. Jae-Hyun was her promise, her sweetest memory, and also her most painful emptiness. That afternoon, while she was sewing a blue dress, she received a short message. "I'm not coming back today." No excuse, no sign of affection. She smiled, trying to keep her faith in love. High above the city, he signed a contract under the covert gaze of Yura, the woman who would turn doubts into distrust. At that moment, without them realizing it, fate began to move the pieces of the game. And when love and ambition move in opposite directions, the abyss soon opens. But who will fall first? In the glass-enclosed tower of the Hansol Group, where decisions were worth millions and smiles were as fake as unsigned contracts, Han Jae-Hyun believed he had everything under his control. Every gesture was meticulously calculated to maintain his image as an impeccable CEO, master of a controlled, untouchable life. But in the discreet shadows of his empire, a silent presence watched over him, Yu-Ra, his personal assistant, ruthless strategist and secret lover who turned desire into manipulation and loyalty into poison. With soft words and eyes that seemed to see beyond the masks, Yu-Ra began to undermine Jae-Hyun's confidence. She didn't say much, but her insinuations came like precisely planted seeds. "Are you sure Hae-Won really is sewing alone every night?" she'd say with a sweet, calculated smile. He pretended not to be shaken, but each sentence fell like acid, corroding what little faith he still had. Carefully forged photos, distorted messages, rumors spread among the staff, all designed to fuel a jealousy he wouldn't admit to feeling. When the rumor that Hae-Won had dinner with a manager reached his ears, something inside him snapped. Overcome by fear of being deceived and shame of appearing weak, he set aside love and chose to listen to his pride. That night, she greeted him with dinner ready and the tired smile of someone who still believes. He responded with a photo thrown on the table. His judgment was relentless, her tears were unmoved, his anger spoke louder, and unbeknownst to him at that moment, he wasn't just throwing out his wife, he was opening the door to his own downfall, because those who destroy love never come out unscathed. The door closed behind Seo Hae-Won with a muffled bang, as if the world had decided in that instant to erase her existence. The rain began again over Seoul, fine, biting, insistent, and the icy wind seemed to want to push her back, but she didn't look back. The wet streets reflected flickering lights, and each step she took felt like the end of a promise. Inside the house that was no longer hers, Han Jae-Hyun watched through the curtain, motionless, with the empty look of someone who had won the argument but lost something she still didn't understand. With a small suitcase and a folded letter in her pocket, Hae-Won wandered aimlessly. She stopped in front of a closed shop window, staring at her distorted reflection, a face she no longer recognized, the memory of dinners waiting for him, of notes left with love, of hopes patiently stitched together. Everything seemed distant, unreal. His words still echoed in her mind like blows. "You're a disgrace. Get out of my life." She made her way to a deserted park, where she sat on a cold bench and opened the letter. With trembling hands, she read her own words. "I don't want to die, Jae-Hyun, but you killed everything in me." As he folded the paper, silent tears fell. Across the city, Jae-Hyun drank, surrounded by silence, trying to convince himself he had done the right thing. But something inside him was already beginning to crumble. The next morning, the city woke without Hae-Won. But the Han River held secrets, and in that dark water, a white leaf floated. The only witness that even wounded love never disappears. It just changes location. And when it changes, fate doesn't hesitate to rewrite everything. Seo Hae-Won's leap was followed by a silence so absolute that even time seemed to hesitate. The Han River, impassive, continued its course, carrying with it the memory of the woman the world now believed dead. For days, rescue teams searched the waters, but found only a blue scarf, the same one Jae-Hyun had given her on their first wedding anniversary, floating near the bank. The news spread quickly. CEO Han's wife disappears after marital dispute. The press treated it as a tragedy. Jae-Hyun as something to be buried discreetly. For the first few days, he feigned coolness, repeating that there was nothing more to be done. But the leap echoed in his nightmares, and at night, the sound of the water seemed to repeat the name he'd tried to erase. Still, he kept up appearances. He was always by Yu-Ra's side at events, smiling mechanically as if nothing had happened. Hundreds of kilometers away, in a village near Busan, a fisherman found a woman unconscious among the rocks. She was still breathing. She was taken to the hospital, where Dr. Kang Do-hyun monitored her slow recovery. Upon awakening, she couldn't remember her name, her past, or why she carried so much sadness in her chest. The doctor named her Hana, reborn flower. As she learned to live again, now as a volunteer caring for wounded women, Jae-Hyun felt the Hansol Empire begin to crumble. The cold walls of her penthouse became a prison, and when Hana, facing the sea, heard a forgotten name on the wind, Hae-Won, she didn't know that her reunion with the truth was approaching, and with it would also come the reckoning that fate had postponed, but never forgiven. 3 years had passed since that tragic night on the bridge, but Han Jae-Hyun remained a prisoner of memories that never freed him. His name still graced magazine covers, but it no longer commanded respect, only doubt and speculation. Investors disappeared into silence, executive boards murmured distrust, and employees avoided him in the hallways. The empire he had built with steady hands and cold decisions was beginning to crack at the invisible foundations of arrogance. At first, he believed in bad luck, small mishaps, a lost contract, an unexpected dismissal, a failed campaign. But the days passed, and the damage multiplied. Projects fell apart, alliances fell apart, and the public image he so cherished began to slowly unravel. The world that had applauded him now watched his downfall in silence. Yura, who had previously showered him with calculated attention, became absent. She began with apologies, then silence, until one morning he woke to find the bed empty. On the table, a short sentence. "Weak men don't interest me." That sentence reverberated like a cruel mirror, returning to him the same words he had once used against Hae-Won. For the first time, he felt the bitter taste of abandonment. The early mornings grew long and silent. The cold apartment, filled with memories, became a mausoleum where he lived with ghosts. One afternoon, before the symbolic tomb he had ordered built for Hae-Won, he knelt down, powerless. He didn't ask for forgiveness. He simply confessed, "If you were here, I would say I even miss your tears." But fate, relentless, wasn't finished with him. And something still unseen was already moving in the shadows, about to change everything. Because love, when it returns, never returns the same way. It was a gala night in the heart of Seoul. The ballroom of the Grand Mirai Hotel glittered under crystal chandeliers, and voices mingled between champagne glasses and promises of business. It was the annual event of Hansol Foundation, and even after the crises, Han Jae-Hyun's name still carried enough weight to be announced among the guests of honor. He walked among smiling faces, but his mind seemed distant, a hollow echo of past glories. His gaze was weary, his shoulders hunched, his soul exhausted. His eyes bore the weariness of someone who survives but does not live. The MC announced the arrival of a new international partnership, a humanitarian foundation that worked to support abused women. The crowd applauded. The host smiled and pronounced the name enthusiastically, Renaissance Foundation, chaired by Dr. Seo Hae-Won. The sound that followed wasn't applause, it was silence, a silence that tore through the air and transformed time into something dense, almost palpable. Jae-Hyun froze. The glass slipped from his hands and shattered on the floor, the liquid spreading like blood across the white carpet. He slowly turned his face toward the stage in disbelief. There, beneath the golden lights, she stood, alive, untouched, elegant as ever. Her long hair fell to her shoulders in soft waves, and her gaze, once subdued, was now serene and confident, the gaze of a woman reborn from the ashes. Beside her, in a dark suit and with a firm posture, stood Dr. Kang Do-hyun, the man who saved her life, now her fiancé and work partner. Jae-Hyun's heart raced as if trying to keep up with his rapid breathing. The applause returned, but it sounded distant, muffled, as if the entire world had disappeared, and only that impossible moment remained. He watched her, unblinking, his chest tight, and in every detail, in the way she walked, in the lightness of her smile, there was an echo of the woman he had once destroyed. She began her speech in a firm, calm voice. True strength is not born from the absence of pain, but from the ability to transform wounds into light. The sentence cut through the air and hit Jae-Hyun hard. The words seemed written for him, and perhaps they were, because no one knew her wounds better than the man who inflicted them. During dinner, he couldn't pull away. His eyes followed her every movement, every gesture, every laugh. At times, he felt as if she noticed him, and indeed she did. Hae-Won felt the weight of that gaze. Inside, her heart was beating fast. A storm she controlled with the calm time had taught her. Do-hyun, noticing something, placed his hand over hers. "Are you well?" She took a deep breath, smiling. "I am. I just felt an ancient wind pass by." When the party ended, Jae-Hyun tried to approach, driven by an impulse he didn't understand. People greeted him, but he barely heard them. He walked to the side aisle, where she was passing beside Do-hyun. For a moment, their eyes met. 3 years of silence, pain, and absence were summed up in that brief eye contact. Time seemed to hesitate between one step and the next. He murmured, almost voicelessly, "Hae-Won?" She turned slowly, her expression neutral. "Sorry, Mr. Han. I think you're confusing me with someone else." Her tone was calm, but her eyes trembled with something that words could not hide. Do-hyun intervened kindly, greeting the CEO and taking her by the arm. "Good evening, Mr. Han. I hope you are well." Jae-Hyun stood there, watching the couple walk away. The sound of her footsteps echoed like a memory fate insisted on. Repeating. When the elevator closed before him, the reflection in the glass revealed a man he no longer recognized, someone who once had everything and now watched helplessly as the past faded away. That night, back in the empty apartment, he opened the window and let the cold wind in. Her scent still lingered in his memory, and the echo of her name Hae-Won echoed like an unanswered prayer. He sat before the mirror, staring at his own reflection. And for the first time, he saw not a businessman, but a broken man haunted by the ghost of the woman who had been reborn to remind him of what he had lost. And as the city lights flickered, he knew with a bitter certainty that fate had only begun to repay him for what he had done to love. Because their reunion was only the beginning. The true reckoning was yet to come. The morning after their reunion, Han Jae-Hyun woke with a feeling he hadn't experienced in a long time: uneasiness. Seo Hae-Won's face haunted him like a living shadow, the memory of her serene eyes gnawing at him more than any financial failure. He spent hours sitting by the office window, watching the hustle and bustle of the streets, and trying to convince himself he'd been mistaken, that perhaps the woman was just a double, a coincidence. But the heart doesn't lie, and conscience, when awakened, becomes the cruelest of mirrors. He knew she was alive. He knew fate had given him a second chance, not to make amends, but to suffer, looking at what he'd destroyed and could never recover. During the day, she pretended to be normal, but her hands trembled whenever someone said her name: Renaissance Foundation. He hurriedly closed meetings, ignored calls, and drove through the streets of Seoul like a man on the run, though he didn't know exactly from what. The memory of her gaze haunted him at every red light, in every storefront reflection. It was the same look as before, but now there was something new in it. A calm that disarmed him, a strength that reminded him of everything he'd lost by choosing pride. The next day, he went to the hospital where she worked. He entered disguised as a businessman interested in funding new social projects. He walked the halls in silence, the sound of his own footsteps mingling with the distant clink of medical instruments. When he saw her appear at the end of the hallway talking to a patient, the world seemed to stop. Hae-Won wore a white lab coat and spoke softly, leaning in to listen attentively. Her smile, discreet and genuine, had the same power as before, the ability to soothe even the hardest heart. But at the same time, that smile brought him pain, for it was a reflection of something he never deserved to keep. She saw him, and for a moment time seemed to hesitate, past and present, intertwined in that silent gaze. He took a step forward, his eyes brimming with tears, but she didn't move. The air between them was heavy, dense, filled with unspoken memories. When he finally approached, his voice came out almost a whisper. "You are alive." I knew that night, I felt it, but I didn't have the courage to believe it. Hae-Won watched him for a few seconds, and then replied with a serenity that cut deeper than any scream. "I believe fate spared you this pain for a while." Her words fell like a gentle but cold rain, and he understood, in that moment, that forgiveness was not available to those who beg for it, only to those who have survived the pain. He tried to justify himself, to say that he had been deceived, manipulated, that he had never meant to hurt her. But she cut him off with a gentle gesture of her hand, the same gesture she used to calm the children in the hospital. "No need to explain, Jae-Hyun. Love doesn't die, but it changes form. I just learned to love differently, away from you." He lowered his gaze, unable to bear the weight of that truth. His eyes welled up, and the pride that had once sustained him crumbled like a condemned building. He felt like kneeling, begging for forgiveness, but he understood it would be futile, because regret comes too late when love has already found a new home. The sound of footsteps approached, and Do-hyun appeared, smiling when he saw Hae-Won. He casually put his arm around her shoulders, and in that simple gesture, Jae-Hyun felt the final blow of fate, seeing another man occupy the space that was once his. Hae-Won introduced him formally. "Dr. Han, this is Dr. Kang Do-hyun, the director of the foundation. He was the one who helped me rebuild my life." The words were polite, but the message was a silent reminder. She had not only survived, she had flourished. Do-hyun, cordial, extended his hand. "It's an honor to meet you, Mr. Han." Hae-Won speaks little about the past, but always with gratitude for everything she's learned. Jae-Hyun squeezed his hand, feeling the weight of the irony. The man fate had chosen to heal the wound he himself had opened. Hae-Won then looked at him one last time, with the serene eyes of someone who doesn't seek revenge, just peace. "I hope you find the same." He said this and walked away slowly, without looking back, leaving in the air the sweet and distant scent of something that was love and is now memory. Jae-Hyun stood motionless in the hallway, watching her disappear among the patients and doctors, like a light slowly fading silently, but leaving a glow in his soul. His heart, so accustomed to control, now beat wildly, disarmed, surrendered to an emptiness impossible to fill. He finally understood that the greatest punishment is not losing someone, but staying alive to see that person move on without you. And as the sound of her footsteps faded into the distance, something inside him crumbled completely, not just his love, but the illusion that he could escape what he had sown. Because fate, patient and implacable, still held the final page of this story, and in it, the price of sin would be exacted down to the last tear. The days that followed, their reunion became a maze of silence and guilt. Han Jae-Hyun no longer recognized his own reflection, and the walls of his apartment, once a symbol of success, now seemed to close in around him like an invisible prison. The curtains remained closed, the air heavy, and the only sound filling the space was the ticking of a clock that seemed to mock the passage of time. He spent sleepless nights, sitting before a forgotten glass of wine, mentally reviewing every gesture, every word, every look he exchanged with Hae-Won. Everything that had once given him power had now become a reminder of weakness. His fortune dwindled, the shareholders revolted, and his name, Han Jae-Hyun, once synonymous with prestige, was beginning to sound like a warning of failure. The decline didn't come abruptly, but like a slow, silent illness. Small mistakes began to pile up, thoughtless decisions, poorly signed contracts, betrayed alliances. It was as if the universe had decided to reverse every past victory, returning the exact weight of every tear she'd ignored. The confidence she'd inspired crumbled, and whispers of distrust echoed through the halls of the Hansol Groupers, a harbinger of ruin. When Yura, the woman for whom he had sacrificed his marriage, publicly abandoned him amid a financial scandal, his downfall became inevitable. The newspapers cruelly ran the headline, "Han Jae-Hyun loses his empire. Former assistant and lover denounces him for fraud and abuse of power." That same morning, he walked into the office and found it nearly empty. Staff had disappeared, documents were scattered, and on the desk lay a white envelope with the word "Destiny" handwritten on it. Inside was a single sheet of paper with Hae-Won's familiar handwriting. Everything that is built on the pain of others, sooner or later, collapses. The leaf fell from his hands, and in that instant, something in him broke completely. The rain fell again over Seoul, as if the sky mourned with him, and it was under that same storm that Jae-Hyun, dragging his feet, decided to return to Mapo Bridge, the very place where it all began, where his laughter echoed for the last time before the silence became punishment. The wind was strong, his soaked clothes clung to his body, and the cold cut like a blade, but he stood firm, his gaze fixed on the turbulent waters below. As he approached the railing, the noise of traffic faded, and all that remained was the sound of the river, the same one that had engulfed him in nightmares for years. He leaned against the railing and looked down. The reflection of the distorted lights resembled a face, hers perhaps, and for a moment he thought he heard the sound of her voice on the wind, soft and distant, whispering his own name. The tears came without permission. They weren't just of regret, but of understanding. For the first time, he understood what he had done. The laughter of yesteryear now sounded within him like a cursed echo. As the rain fell harder, he closed his eyes and muttered something that the wind carried away before it could be fully heard. "Hae-Won, love doesn't die. It just changes sides." Thunder ripped through the sky, and in that instant, lightning illuminated the river. And there, in the reflection of the water, he swore he saw her silhouette. The same woman in a white dress, with the same serene gaze, watching him silently. The sight made him take a step back, his heart racing, his body trembling. And for a second, he believed it was the end. But fate once again would not let him escape so easily. Suddenly, a voice called from behind, firm and regal. It was Do-hyun, who had followed him there after finding out about his hospital visit. "If you seek forgiveness, you must first learn to forgive yourself." Jae-Hyun didn't answer, just stared at him with teary eyes. The doctor approached, grabbed his shoulder, and stopped him from taking the fatal step. The world seemed to collapse around them. And yet, in that small gesture, something broke, the cycle he himself had created. They went to the hospital that night, and as he lay in a cold, silent bed, Jae-Hyun felt his mind empty. There was no more empire, no more lovers, no more contracts, only memories. And as the distant sound of rain mingled with the rhythm of the machines, he understood that perhaps fate's true punishment wasn't death, but conscience. Because sometimes what fate takes away isn't life, but the peace of having it. And what was about to happen would show that love, even wounded, could still choose one last gesture of compassion. The dawn dragged on slowly when Han Jae-Hyun opened his eyes in the hospital room. The white ceiling blinded him for a moment, and the smell of antiseptic brought him back to reality. He was weak, hooked up to tubes and wires, his mind wavering between dream and guilt. His last memories were the sound of the rain, Do-hyun's firm touch holding him at the edge, and the bitter sensation of having faced his own soul. Now silence enveloped him completely, and each heartbeat sounded like a reminder that he was still alive, alive enough to face the consequences of his own fate. The doctor entered silently, observing him for a few seconds before speaking. Do-hyun's gaze held understanding, but also a respectful distance. "You were lucky, Mr. Han. The body can only take so much, but regret weighs on you for a lifetime." The words weren't accusatory. They were almost a mirror. Jae-Hyun tried to respond, but his throat failed him. He wanted to thank him. He wanted to justify himself. He wanted to say he didn't deserve help. But his voice wouldn't come. So he simply nodded, accepting the burden fate had imposed on him. Hours later, as the sun began to break through the clouds, a nurse came in and left a small arrangement of white flowers and an envelope with no return address on his bedside table. He glanced at it hesitantly, his heart racing. His trembling hands tore open the paper carefully, as if he feared what he would find. Inside was a simple note written in a soft, firm hand. "Forgiveness is the only love that survives death." The tears came effortlessly. They were silent, unlike the tears of despair he had shed on the bridge. It was a pure, resigned cry of someone who understands that forgiveness is not a deserved gift, but a divine gesture, an act of love that transcends pride and human justice. He pressed the note to his chest and closed his eyes, allowing the distant sound of rain to echo within him again, this time with a melancholy sweetness. In the hallway, unnoticed, Seo Hae-Won watched through the glass window. She wore simple clothes and kept her hair tied back, her face serene, almost ethereal. Do-hyun stood beside her, silent, respecting the moment. She didn't enter. There was nothing more to say, nor was there any hatred to heal. All she needed to do was on that piece of paper, in those few words that contained a story written with pain and pride. She took one last look at the man she once loved, now reduced to the fragility of someone who learned too late the meaning of humility. And without looking back, she turned and walked down the hallway lit by the rising sun, as if each step were a goodbye that time was finally accepting. Inside the room, Jae-Hyun slowly lifted his face, and as he looked in the mirror opposite the bed, he felt like he saw something he had long forgotten. Peace. Not complete peace, but the beginning of it. A timid flame. A kindling amid the wreckage of guilt. He knew he would never be worthy of a new beginning, but perhaps in that silent forgiveness, there was a chance he would not die in vain. The breeze through the window brought with it the scent of white flowers, the same aroma that had once hung over their home before the tragedy. He closed his eyes and for a moment imagined Hae-Won's smiling figure, not as a memory, but as a presence. And in that brief vision, he understood that the love she gave him had never left him. It had merely changed form, as the seasons ceaselessly change. And even though fate had stripped him of everything, he finally understood that the true miracle was not having survived. It was having been forgiven. But fate, ever true to its own irony, still held one last message, a final lesson that ended not with forgiveness, but with memory. Because love may forgive, but time never completely forgets. The following days passed slowly, as if time had decided to spare him from oblivion, forcing him to live every second of his own consciousness. Han Jae-Hyun was still under medical care, and visitors were few. The hospital had become his silent purgatory, a place between life and death where all that remained was the echo of the choices that defined him. Each sunrise seemed a reminder that life, even after everything, insists on offering a chance for repentance. He walked the corridors in silence, observing the other patients and recognizing in their dejected looks a reflection of his own journey, all trying to survive what they had lost. On a particularly cold morning, Dr. Kang Do-hyun accompanied him to the hospital's inner garden. The trees swayed gently, and petals fell like snow onto the damp ground. Jae-hyun walked slowly, leaning on the cane they'd given him after his collapse, breathing heavily but calmly. "Guilt ages the body, Mr. Han," Do-hyun said, looking at him compassionately. "But forgiveness rejuvenates the soul." He didn't answer immediately. He simply smiled with a sweet weariness, like someone finally understanding the silent language of life. After a moment, he murmured, "I lost her trying to be invincible, and in the end, I discovered that love was the only thing that made me human." The words hung in the air, as if the wind refused to carry them away. Do-hyun nodded silently and left him there, alone among the flowers. Jae-hyun then sat on a stone bench and gazed at the horizon. The sky, tinged with gold and pink, looked identical to the night it all began. There was something symbolic about that moment, as if fate wanted to show him the full cycle of life, the pride that lifted him, the pain that broke him, and the forgiveness that finally set him free. He took the note Hae-Won had left him from his pocket and opened it again. The letters, already a little faded, still held the same strength. "Forgiveness is the only love that survives death." He read it aloud, as if reciting a prayer, and realized that for the first time he felt light, not because he had forgotten, but because he finally accepted what time had strived to teach, that some loves don't return to start over, but to teach us how to live differently. The sun touched his face, and he closed his eyes. For a brief moment he smelled the scent of white flowers and the distant sound of laughter. When he opened them again, he had the distinct impression of seeing Hae-Won walking through the trees, dressed in blue, with the same calm gaze as before. She said nothing, just smiled, and the wind seemed to carry that smile to him like a breath of farewell. And it was in that moment, between reality and daydream, that Han Jae-Hyun understood the meaning of it all. It wasn't about reliving the love he lost, but about honoring it, about allowing something beautiful to remain, even after the mistake. Life didn't give him a second chance to win back, but to understand. And perhaps deep down, that was what fate had expected of him all along. But Hae-Won's gaze, though distant, seemed to hold a secret that time would not easily reveal. Because some reunions don't just happen on Earth. And the true final chapter was still waiting for the right moment to be written. Months have passed since that last day in the hospital, and time, patient as ever, has tried to erase the most visible marks of the past. Hansol Group had been dissolved, its building sold, and Han Jae-Hyun's name disappeared from the news as quietly as it had once appeared. To many, he was just another businessman who lost everything. But to those who knew him, there was something about his absence that didn't feel like defeat. It felt more like a fitting farewell from someone who had finally understood that the true value of things isn't measured in wealth, but in repentance and humanity. Seo Hae-Won, in turn, continued with the Renaissance Foundation, now one of the most respected organizations in the country. She traveled to different cities, giving talks about overcoming and starting over. Sometimes, in the midst of her speech, she would discreetly share stories that seemed drawn from her own soul. She spoke of forgiveness, of unending love, and of how suffering can be transformed into light. People cried, touched by something they didn't fully understand, and she smiled serenely, as if she had learned to talk to the past without allowing it to hurt her again. One afternoon, while walking through the park near the Han River, Hae-Won stopped. Before the bridge, the cool autumn wind blew on her face, and the water reflected the golden glow of the sunset. She approached the railing and, with her hands resting on the cool metal, closed her eyes. She took a deep breath and let the silence fill her. There was no more pain, only a gentle longing, a gratitude for everything she had experienced, even the part she once thought she hated. She opened her bag, took out the blue scarf that Do-hyun had returned months earlier, and threw it into the water with a calm, resolute gesture. The fabric floated slowly, swaying among the waves until it disappeared, as if the river were accepting it back, ending the cycle where it all began. Do-hyun, from a distance, watched in silence. He knew that gesture wasn't just symbolic, it was the end of a story fate had written with tears and hope. He approached, wrapped his arm around her, and asked if she was ready to move on. Hae-Won smiled and replied firmly, "I already have. I was just waiting for my heart to understand." And then they walked together, leaving behind the bridge, the river, and the distant echo of a past that was finally at rest. Meanwhile, the invisible narrator of fate observed everything with the same calm as time. Because in the end, love is not a straight line, but a circle. It begins, hurts, is reborn, and one day returns to the same point, only with a different form, a different soul, and a different wisdom. Han Jae-Hyun had passed away peacefully weeks earlier, without fanfare, only a letter left in the hospital room, which read, "Love doesn't die, it just changes sides. And it was in your forgiveness that I was reborn." The clouds parted, revealing the clear sky after the rain, and in that instant, the wind blew with an almost spiritual lightness, as if the universe itself whispered that everything was finally in balance. The past had served its purpose. Love had been understood, and the silence, which had once been punishment, was now simply peace. If this story touched your heart, subscribe to the channel now and continue following profound stories like this one. Narratives that prove that love, pain, and destiny are always intertwined. Like, share, and comment on what resonated most with you in this episode. Because sometimes the simple act of listening to a story can change the way you see life.